What do Aaron Jones, Mike Evans, and Lamar Jackson all have in common? They all busted for your fantasy teams in Week 6. Let's talk about them and many others. Welcome back, Endgame community. I'm Chris, and today we're going to talk about some players who didn't live up to expectations in Week 6 or maybe haven't been living up to expectations all season long. And we're going to find out, should we or should we not be panicking about these players? And let's start, of course, with Aaron Jones. I just mentioned him. Hasn't really been good this year outside of Week 2. Hasn't been terrible, but just hasn't been that high upside running back a lot of people thought they were drafting, right? All the talk in the offseason was, oh my gosh, no Davante Adams, Aaron Jones is going to smash. Well, guess what? Aaron Jones hasn't been smashing, and he didn't smash again here in Week 6 against, a good but not great Jets defense. Only 9 carries for 19 yards, only 3 catches for 25 yards. The problem here is 2 things. Number one, A.J. Dillon, still way too much involved for Aaron Jones to have any real, true fantasy upside. But the biggest problem here is this offense is terrible. This is not the Green Bay Packers offense we're used to that puts up a ton of points, gives Aaron Jones a ton of chances to score. He's just not getting scoring opportunities. And Aaron Jones has always been a guy who has relied on pass catching and touchdowns. Well, A.J. Dillon is getting his share of targets, and this offense is not giving Aaron Jones his share of touchdown opportunities. So I'm going to put the panic level medium here for Aaron Jones. It's starting to climb and it could reach high, but right now medium. And I think going forward, you just have to accept that Aaron Jones is nothing more than a low-end RB2 in fantasy. It was a great start to the season for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Looked like he was on his way to a breakout season. And look, maybe he still will be, but it hasn't been great the last 2 weeks. Definitely was not great in Week 6. On the plus side, he did lead the Chiefs in carries with 9. On the downside, though, not a single target in this game, not a single catch. And look, for a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's not going to be a workhorse, not going to be a guy that's going to get 15 to 20 carries, he needs to catch some passes in this offense to have value, and he needs to get looks around the goal line. In the last 2 weeks, we've barely seen that. Now, granted, this was a tough matchup against a tough Bills run defense. I still think Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be okay, but we have to accept that he was really living on, huge plays and ridiculous touchdown, rates early in the season, and that's kind of coming back down to earth. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'm going to put the panic level medium here, but just probably have to understand that he's going to be a very volatile running back too. Some weeks he's going to boom, some weeks he's going to bust. It's great that J.K. Dobbins has been able to come back from quite literally the worst ACL tear you can possibly have. He tore every ligament and even tore his hamstring muscle. And he was back on the field way sooner than I thought he would be and way sooner than a lot of people thought he would be. But it's obvious he is not close to 100% and probably shouldn't be on the field, to be honest. Not only is he barely playing any snaps, but his knee tightened up. That was the report. His knee tightened up in Week 6. And to make matters worse, Kenyon Drake looked great. Kenyon Drake ripping off big runs, giving the Ravens something they do not have with J.K. Dobbins right now. Probably should not have rushed J.K. Dobbins back, the Ravens that is. But they needed him, and they did, and I get it. But look, if you drafted J.K. Dobbins, or if you grabbed him off waiver wire, or if you traded for him, it's probably going to be a lost season for J.K. Dobbins because, again, we've seen it. Look at Saquon Barkley last year, who is a way better talent and prospect than J.K. Dobbins. He couldn't really overcome an ACL tear, and his tear wasn't nearly as devastating as J.K. Dobbins' tear is. So unlikely that J.K. Dobbins is going to be anything more than a touchdown or bust running back for the rest of the season. And at this point, you got to wonder if he's even going to be able to surpass Kenyon Drake, who's actually looking good. So I got to put the panic level high for J.K. Dobbins. You remember when James Robinson looked like he was going to win you your league after Week 3? What happened? He has not topped 6.5 PPR points. 6.5 PPR points in the last 3 games. 2.9, 5, and 6.5. Those are his game logs over the last 3 games. But worse than that for James Robinson is Travis Etienne looks the part. Travis Etienne looks like a running back who should have been drafted in the first round. He's explosive. He's hitting on big plays. When the Jags need a play, he makes it. Look, Etienne still hasn't completely pulled away from James Robinson for some reason because I don't know why. I mean, Doug Peterson has to see that these guys are on completely different levels here. But the problem for James Robinson is Etienne has passed him enough to make James Robinson's value useless in fantasy. Basically, just like Dobbins, James Robinson has to score a touchdown to have any value right now. When you watch these guys run, it's just obvious that Travis Etienne is healthier and on a different level from James Robinson. And I think Etienne's role is only going to grow and grow and grow because, look, you can't keep a guy on the bench when he's ripping off big runs and making plays for your football team for very long. Eventually, that guy will take over. Eventually, Etienne will take over. It was a nice story for James Robinson at the beginning of the season. People thought they had a league winner. It's over. I'm sorry. Panic level high for James Robinson. Honestly, at this point, very close to droppable in shallower leagues. And then, man, was it a good run for Jeff Wilson? Is it over? Was it one of those weeks? What just happened? Not only was Jeff Wilson terrible, only 25 yards on the ground against a terrible Atlanta defense, but he also fumbled and got you a whopping half of a PPR point. 1/2 of 1 point. Not even a full point in PPR leagues. This guy had kind of been carrying your team the last few weeks. This was just a crazy game. Atlanta's defense came to play. They turned Jimmy G over. They turned Jeff Wilson over. Atlanta put points on him. This was the exact opposite of how we thought this game was going to go. I'm going to put the panic level low here for Jeff Wilson. Yes, it was a terrible game. And if you started him, he probably lost you your week. It happens. But Jeff Wilson is still the guy here. Not worried about Tevin Coleman. Not worried about Davis Price yet. That he may start worrying me. Not worried about Elijah Mitchell yet. And look, this is a guy you grabbed off waivers more than likely. So be happy with the last 3 games you got from him and whatever you get going forward. Can't put the panic level high just because it's Jeff Wilson and nobody was counting on this guy to win them their league. So panic level low for Jeff Wilson. All right, let's move on to wide receiver. And I already talked about him a little bit in the intro, and that's Mike Evans. 2 really down games in 2 smash spots. Don't really have a good explanation for this other than this offense and, to a lesser degree, Tom Brady, who I'm going to talk about later, looks off. They look bad. Something is just off with this team. They're able to move the ball. They're able to get close to scoring, and then they have to settle for field goals. You know, whether it's a sack, a penalty, just not being on the same page with his receivers, whatever it is, Tom Brady just doesn't look like the same guy, and by extension, that is affecting Mike Evans. But here's the thing with Mike Evans. He has games like this. This guy is very boom or bust. We know on any given week, he can go out there and drop 2 touchdowns and win you your fantasy week. So I still think better days are ahead for the Bucs and for Tom Brady and for Mike Evans. So I'm going to put the panic level low on Mike Evans. You know, we talk about James Robinson being like a league winner through the first 3 weeks. What about Christian Kirk? What has happened to Christian Kirk? Got paid all that money, came out of the gate red hot the first 3 weeks, and everybody said, see, they paid him for a reason. Well, apparently that reason was to not target him anymore because this guy doesn't get any targets anymore. Even with Marvin Jones out this week, only 4 targets. Now, granted, he did save his day with his touchdown, but outside of that, did almost nothing in this game. Even with that touchdown, barely helped your fantasy team this week at all. I mean, there's lots of wide receivers you could have played over Christian Kirk who didn't score a touchdown, who were better than Christian Kirk. But the real concern here is his targets over the last 3 games have been really, really low. And again, without Marvin Jones this week, thinking he would see a for sure bump in targets, he didn't. So I got to put the panic level high on Christian Kirk. Remember, this isn't some elite wide receiver who they went out and signed like a Devontae Adams or a Tyreek Hill. This is a guy who's just kind of been okay his whole career. And after the first 3 games, we thought, okay, it was just because Arizona didn't know how to use him. But maybe the reality is he's just okay as a wide receiver. So he's probably going to be very volatile, very boom bust on a week-to-week basis. But panic level has to be high for Christian Kirk. All right, let's talk about a pair of Commanders receivers, and let's start with Terry McLaurin. I feel like Terry McLaurin has been on the panic video more than any player in the history of our panic video dating back to last year. And it's not his fault. He's a great player, but he's stuck in a terrible situation. He's stuck with terrible quarterback play. And guess what? It's probably not going to get any better because now we're hearing that Carson Wentz has a broken finger and may miss up to 4 to 6 weeks. And that means we're looking at Taylor Heinicke again. Yes, the guy everybody was so excited that Terry McLaurin was getting away from is probably going to be the quarterback again. And if by some chance the Commanders have the guts to fire Ron Rivera, which they probably won't, but if they do, then it's probably going to be Sam Howell. You can't be excited about either of those guys as Terry McLaurin starting quarterback. This offense is a mess. The defense is a mess. The whole team is a mess. The whole organization is a mess. So panic level, I think it's been high for Terry McLaurin for like 3 weeks. It's still high. I'm not really sure how you can even still be starting Terry McLaurin. Nothing more than a desperation flex play. All right, now the other Commanders wide receiver I need to talk about is Curtis Samuel. Good news for Curtis Samuel. Once again, led the team in targets. Only 5, but he led the team in targets again. He's done that a lot this year. Unfortunately, only caught 2 passes for 6 yards, but he did have that deep touchdown that he dropped. Had he caught that pass, things would be okay right now. But still, it's not a great situation. He's not getting a lot of chances down the field. He's more of just Carson Wentz's and maybe now Taylor Heineke's safety valve underneath. Just not a lot of upside for this guy. But I'm going to put panic level at medium here because, again, this isn't a guy like Terry McLaurin that you drafted in the 3rd or 4th round to count on week in and week out. Probably a guy you grabbed off of waivers. A guy who I think still has flex value in the right matchups, just not a ton of upside. All right, now to a couple of rookies. Let's start with Drake London. After a red hot start, has definitely crashed back down to earth. Even this week when Atlanta rolled the 49ers, which nobody expected, it was more of a Pitts week than a London week. But really, it's a nobody week in this passing game. They just don't throw the ball enough. Algier had a nice day running. Caleb Huntley had a nice day running. Marcus Mariota picked up, a lot of yards on the ground. They're just not a team that throws the ball enough to support Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Maybe if Desmond Ridder gets a chance down the road, that will change. But right now, this is a run-first offense, and it's very unlikely that both Pitts and London are going to have good games on the same week. One could have a good game, the other could, but unlikely that both will. So Drake London, I'm going to put the panic level medium here. No, he wasn't a high-end draft pick. He was somebody you got maybe in the middle rounds. But people were starting to count on this guy as an every week, startable wide receiver, and I'm just not sure that's going to be the case. Now, the other rookie is with the Jets, and that's Garrett Wilson. And this guy came out of the gates flying. People thought he was going to be a league-winning rookie this year. And then Zach Wilson came back, and Garrett Wilson has disappeared. 1 catch for 8 yards today. Granted, he did have 5 targets, but it's Zach Wilson throwing him the ball. If you spent up a bunch of fab for Garrett Wilson or you used a number 1 priority on him, at this point, you got to think that was just a waste because it doesn't look like for however long Zach Wilson is a quarterback that this passing attack is going to become good enough to support Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, and Elijah Moore, who I'm going to talk about next. So I'm not ready to say you have to drop Garrett Wilson, but if you have somebody really good on the waiver wire to grab instead of Wilson, I think you can drop him. Panic level high for Garrett Wilson. And then I just mentioned Elijah Moore. Now I said Garrett Wilson, maybe you could drop him. You can absolutely drop Elijah Moore, no questions asked. 0 targets in week 6. 0 targets. How is that even possible? This guy isn't like a bum wide receiver. This is a talented wide receiver. How do you not even target him 1 time? Not sure what's going on with Elijah Moore. The whole season has been a bust for him. Definitely can't be started in fantasy, but honestly can't even be rostered in fantasy right now. If there's anybody worth grabbing on the waiver wire, drop Elijah Moore right now. Pick that player up. Panic level sky high for Elijah Moore. All right, let's move on to quarterback, and we got some big names, and we got to start with Lamar Jackson. After 2 straight 40-point games in weeks 2 and week 3, it looked like Lamar Jackson was going to destroy fantasy football this year, and then he hasn't. 15, 15, and 17 here in week 6. A couple of really bad turnovers. I don't really know what's going on with Lamar Jackson. He's still running the football. He's just not putting up a lot through the air, not throwing for a lot of touchdowns, not throwing for a lot of yards. Maybe he needs Rashad Bateman. I'm not really sure because outside of Bateman, they don't really have any wide receivers. Mark Andrews like his number 1 target. I still think Lamar Jackson will be fine and better days will be ahead. And one thing about Lamar Jackson is his schedule from now until about week 13 is really, really tough. But then in week 14 and through the fantasy playoffs, when it really matters, his schedule gets really easy. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh again. So if you can get through this stretch, and look, he's still been okay, he's still been serviceable, but if you can get through this stretch with him, he'll still have some good games. Light at the end of the tunnel, he should smash down the stretch. But, Lamar Jackson, I can't put the panic level any higher than low here because we know he's still a great quarterback in fantasy especially. So not going crazy panicking on Lamar, but maybe what he did the first few weeks, maybe that was a little more than we should have expected. All right, another kind of rushing quarterback like Lamar Jackson is Kyler Murray. Now on the plus side here in week 6, 100 rushing yards. I mean, if you had told me Kyler Murray was going to run for 100 yards against the Seattle Seahawks, I would have told you he'd have a 30-point game. He'd probably throw for 2-something, throw for a couple touchdowns, but he didn't. No touchdowns, 1 interception. This Cardinals offense looks absolutely broken right now. Seattle was giving up a ton of points to every offense they played, and then just gave up 9 to the Cardinals. I don't know what's going on in Arizona, and to make matters worse, Marquise Brown, pretty much the one real offensive weapon they have, left that game late with some type of ankle injury. We don't know the severity, but they have a quick turnaround on Thursday night. Chances are he's not going to be ready. Kyler Murray does get DeAndre Hopkins back this week, so maybe that will help. Maybe that will jumpstart the offense, but I don't think it will because DeAndre Hopkins was not an elite wide receiver last year, and I don't think he's going to be an elite wide receiver this year. But still, Kyler Murray isn't killing you. And, we had questions like, should we drop Kyler Murray? Who are you going to drop Kyler Murray for? It's not like there are great QBs just hanging out on your waiver wire waiting to be picked up. So I'm going to put panic level medium for Kyler Murray because, this offense looks really bad. Kingsbury probably should not be an NFL head coach. But there's not really a lot you can do. You just kind of have to roll with Kyler Murray every week and hope it gets better. And then a guy the panic level may be high on is Tom Brady. The Steelers were missing pretty much their entire starting secondary. This was a matchup kind of like the Bills last week where the Bucs should have just gone out and destroyed the Steelers. And instead, they couldn't score a touchdown until basically the final drive of the game. Just kept settling for field goals. And that's been a problem all year for the Buccaneers. They cannot finish drives. They get into scoring range, and then they just can't finish and can't put touchdowns on the board. And Tom Brady, only 245 passing yards today, only 1 touchdown against this secondary, this decimated, basically an all backup secondary. Look, I'm not going to pretend to know what's going on with Tom Brady mentally or anything, but we know there are some serious things going on in his life right now that may be distracting him from football and may be preventing him from playing at his absolute best. So I got to put the panic level high here for Tom Brady. This was an absolute get right smash spot, and he didn't. And if he can't do it this week, I'm not really sure when he can. And then another veteran Hall of Fame quarterback who really has not been good this year is Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not inside Aaron Rodgers' head. I don't know what's going on. But it looks to me like this guy is already ready to retire. There's already reports saying that he's pretty much done after this year. He's going to retire. He has no weapons. I mean, Lazard is nice. Dubs maybe, but he has no weapons. Losing Davante Adams was a huge blow. This offense looks terrible. They can't really run the ball. They can't really throw the ball. They can't make plays when they need to. This is not the Green Bay offense we're used to, and this is not the back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers we are used to. At this point, again, I got to put panic level high here. This is a guy who's barely startable in 1 QB leagues, like a borderline start in 1 QB leagues, and in tough matchups, will probably need to be on the bench. All right, so now you know some players you should or should not be panicking about. You need to know who to start, who to sit, who to grab off waiver wire, everything you need to dominate your Week 7 matchup. We got you covered. Check out this playlist right here.